Welcome to Funnel Reboot, the podcast that shares ideas on how to upgrade your lead generation. Here is your host, Glenn Schmeltzley.
Hey, Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot. Today, we're asking the question, are our marketing functions built to flip, built to last, or built to change? But first, I want to mention that we're coming up to our 100th episode. I think that's worth saying thanks. I've got a special way of doing this. If you've been listening to past episodes, we've featured some books, and I have some books to give away. You don't have to do much eligible for the draw that I'm going to hold. We're simply going to take people who have put their emails in on the email sign up on the website or mentioned us on social. That's it. Come back to us by June 30th of 2022, and I'll make sure you're in the draw. Now to today's show. Change is the constant in today's marketing. The firms that adapt to that reality are going to survive. Those marketing employers that think conventional practices like communicating everything via emails, having daily office commutes, and rewarding people with Starbucks gift cards, thinking they cut it, they're probably not going to survive this environment for long. My guest today knows this well from an agency leader's perspective. She is VP of Growth at Aimclear, a marketing agency that's been named the best integrated agency 5 times in a row. Her experience in this field for the last dozen years has taken her through B2B and B2C marketing leadership experiences. She's spoken at conferences like SMX, HeroConf, PRSA, FoundCon, and TogetherDigital, and she's been published in SearchEngineLand and MarketingLand. She was also a finalist for Landy's Search Female Marketing of the Year Award. The guest is Amanda Farley, and we're just going to jump straight into the conversation that Amanda and I were having.
There's like an evergreen piece. So a lot of what we're talking about is what's kind of currently happened. That's like, but it's also like that's a piece of it kind of by nature, but it's also really a lot bigger than that from like an evergreen perspective of how really future proofing your marketing team needs to be.
Yep. And like, I think I was talking with somebody and they're actually in the like financial and investment world. But the way they put it was, we have to start with mindset. If people, like in their world, they're having to talk to people about volatility, and those people begin the conversation with saying things like, "This sucks and I'm nervous." And, while you want to just kind of support that, this person I was talking to and said instead, actually, what I have to do at that standpoint is I have to say to them, this change is real and it's going to be ongoing. And if you stick with your narrow definition of how things are right now, then the only thing I can kind of tell you is guaranteed is that it's going to continue to suck. But why are you looking at it that way?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have to look at it that way? Right. So that's, I just thought that was interesting that somebody in a completely different field is like, okay, well, this is the new normal. So.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point, because I think when we talk about the companies and the marketing teams that are succeeding, it is that mindset that's different. It's not necessarily they have different tools or different talents or any of that. It's the mindset of the leadership, it's the mindset of, the C-suite. It's the mindset of how the team works together. Like that is what it is. Like that's
okay. And I love that because, we're both on the vendor side. If we even take that into the brand side, think of all those calls that you've had with a client that hasn't done that. It's like this, right? Mm-hmm. Now think of the calls where, you can't quite put your finger on it, but that they've got it. They've made that mind shift. Now things just, like you admit, yeah, we did an experiment and it flopped, and they say, okay, and by the way, we tried something and, it didn't work, and, but, here's some more cash, try something else.
Yeah. And a lot of it too is it's being okay with like whatever the plan is. It's like knowing that it's going to change. Like it's going to change and evolve as you move through. So some things are going to work really well. Some things are going to work for a while, but then that's going to change. And so it's like you constantly have to be innovating. And a lot of what we're talking about now too with clients is like, we need to have a testing budget that's not completely tied to ROI for beta testing, for testing the new, like the latest new thing to see what's going to work and what's going to stick. So when we look at the macro, we still have like a macro budget and initiative, like some of that needs to be reserved for testing and adjusting. So
yeah, we should just jump in right here.
okay.
So Amanda, when you're looking at talking with customers, it sounds like there's a tale of two worlds here, right? Tale of two clients. There's the type that are, we're here in early 2022, they're probably looking at same quarter last year reports, and they're not happy. And yet you have other clients where doing the same kind of campaigns, and maybe they're not looking at those reports as much, or maybe whatever they're doing, they seem to be accepting or more happy with it. How do you explain that?
Yeah. So really looking at when we talk about year over year reporting by client, part of it is understanding where the ecosystem was last year and does that even make sense to compare to, right?
True.
And with with the clients that are looking at where do we go from here, they're not looking at how do we do in 2020 and how do we do in 2021, because there's so many things that have changed between now and then. It's not really a fair comparison. So what we look at is trends. How are we doing right now? How are we doing compared to competition? How are we doing it from a trajectory perspective into, this quarter compared to last quarter? Is there anything that we can expect that we can now take into the following quarter? When you talk about year over year reporting, there was, I remember for years and years, we could say, oh, look how like this was different from last January and this is how we improved. But now you have to calculate all of these other events that somewhat can be business related and sometimes aren't business related, but impact business. So in the e-commerce space, we have things like supply chain and user behavior. And right now, it's inflation and all of these other things that are changing. Like it's just the constant change that's happening. So looking at last year, it's a really tough thing still to do.
Yeah. So in e-commerce, what used to be ever present was the seasonal, right? Was the, okay, if we're in the space where Mother's or Father's Day matters, we're going heavy there, then it's, we're into maybe a summer blitz, and then it's, heading up to Black Friday. You're saying that, if you don't have the product, that it doesn't matter anymore, or when you do have a certain kind of product, maybe then you're putting a blitz on it.
Yeah, or we'll see inflated numbers maybe because there's a demand for a product that we have that is related to a worldly event. So right now it's baby formula. We have clients that offer baby formula on the e-commerce side. So obviously you're going to see this huge spike this month because there's a shortage in baby formula this month. Well, if I go back a year from now and look at that, like looking at year over year, there's going to be like
makes no sense. Yeah.
And I think we saw the same thing with PPE equipment, right?
Yeah.
Like where you have these inflated numbers where some companies were doing super well in e-commerce because they had the equipment at the time. And then you look at that month again, year over year, well, the demand isn't as high and it doesn't matter. And even in the B2B space, when we look at their annual outlook, it includes things like trade shows and quarter four planning and all these other things that are also continuing to evolve. And although we're seeing, some of these things coming back, they're also the user behavior is still drastically changed because the needs of the companies. There was this huge shift that happened in B2B, software land where everybody accelerated into software growth.
Yeah.
because of what was happening. And now some of that demand has subsided a little bit. And part of it's just because we had a huge acceleration. So it's like
Yeah.
comparing to last year, if you're, if you're working on, offering virtual services to companies that never offered it, and you looked at last year's data, like, well, they've already installed all of that now. So like this
Right.
wouldn't be that same thing. So you really have to look at that big picture, and the companies that
Yeah.
internally, whether you're internal or agency side, knowing like what's the ecosystem of what we're really comparing, and is this really apples to apples, and how do we best look at the data to make good decisions moving forward.
Yeah. We'll work towards the ecosystem, but I just want to underline first, you're absolutely right. Whether it's a scarcity or actually an overabundance, the number of things that we're seeing change in buying behavior here, they're probably not going to go away. We will probably see some of the relative, we used to have practices that were relatively stable. If I look at B2B, there was like that buying committee of like 5, 6 people, and they were normally giving us, at least our sales team, a 1 to 2 quarter window into, all right, here's an actual decision that's going to be made. You pointed out quite rightly that all went out the window in 2020, and we saw things getting fast tracked that had never been fast tracked. But by the same token, as we moved over into 2021 and now 2022, some of them found that they just can't digest all the things that they bought. And so now there's, it's coming down, and, that'll show up in high churn numbers. But this kind of volatility is now going to be, what we're going to see from now on. There will be these outside forces, or at least a jitteriness by buyers, that make these numbers much harder for us to pattern off of, right? So I guess the point of why we're bringing all this up is, how do we manage with that? How do we make this, can we even future proof it?
And I think the answer is yes. And it comes down to the mindset. You have to be super agile as a business and as a marketing team to be able to execute on initiatives in a fashion where we create a plan. There's like the plan we create, and then there's what actually happens, which are going to be different things.
Yeah.
And when I look at, taking outside the worldly events completely and knowing that that's a factor, but just look at the channel side. Like in a lot of ways, that part of it isn't new for us in digital marketing. Like the amount of changes that are coming in from Google, whether that's on the SEO or the paid side, the amount of updates that are happening within Facebook or Instagram or the latest new channel that's out. And so part of it is you have to keep on your toes. Anyways, you have to constantly be trying new things. Like I always talk about my dark days of marketing in the beginning. Like I remember transferring personal Facebook pages to business Facebook pages. And then like gating was a thing, and then it wasn't a thing. And then everybody needed mobile websites, and then now it's responsive. So in that sense, if you're keeping ahead of that and you have that mindset that says, okay, what do we need to be doing right now? Not what do we do 2 years from now or 2 years ago, but what do we need to do right now, or what is changing, and making sure that we're evolving and adapting. That's really what's going to make or break the difference of a success in a marketing or business, really. Because even on the business side of things, there's been just huge shifts, but marketing, we've taken such a big piece, I think, of the heat when you talk about like sales and marketing and like the evolution of the sales teams too. So yeah, I think it really comes down to that agility and the mindset of like pushing ahead.
Yeah, whether we like it or not, on all sides, we have players that are changing. And, maybe that's a little bit of the ecosystem that you're speaking of, where we have to admit, you have to get down to first principles. What do we know? Well, if we look over at things like ad platforms, we know that they've put automation, from stem to stern in their platforms. How do machines work? Machines will run something and then evaluate and then automatically adjust. So for us to stay in this mindset, we have to wait until the annual product management event where they walk out their new features, and we have, a month or two to get ready before they are seen by the rest of the world. That's gone. The machines, they've implemented the features already. They're on our screen as we get up in the morning and, turn on our interface. That's just what we're going to have. It's not going to go back to anything like it was before. And like you say, sales is responding too. They're coming off the road. They're becoming Zoom warriors, not road warriors. We have to respond to that. These are all things that they're not going to go away. We're going to have more of those options, and we have to be nimble. To use your word, we have to be agile.
Yeah. And I think it comes down to with the mindset too, it's the people, right? It's knowing that all of this comes down to the people that are behind it. Like, Facebook's an ad channel, but unless you've got the right people behind it that are putting in the right strategies, communicating, testing out the latest things, communicating with their sales teams, whatever platform they're using. One of the biggest mistakes I see in businesses is they onboard this software and then they don't hire anyone to manage it. And then it's like, oh, well, we paid all this money for things, but like, we don't see the value. And it's like, well, great. You implemented a CRM system, but you don't have like an administrator and you don't have somebody that's like training the sales teams on it or whatever. So there is like just such a huge people component to kind of what works within an agile environment as well, because you have to be there to think strategically to try those new things.
Yeah, the software by itself, they all need to be connected to the other pieces of software, hence the word stack. And they also have to be reconfigured. And if your people aren't proficient in them, well, what are you thinking? Imagining that you can't put a fresh person down in front of a software that has, hundreds of thousands of lines of code and ask them to configure it right the first time. It's just not going to happen. So let's keep on this people groove. What is it? You and I are both agency side, so we're well familiar with how you need people to be able to deliver these services. What do you see as working and not working in terms of having people after the great reshuffle or whatever we want to call it? What does it take these days? Or maybe what you can tell me is, let's start with what's not going to work anymore.
So I think what doesn't work anymore is not listening. It comes down to really empathy and understanding and communication and knowing what matters to the teams that are pushing these businesses forward. And that's going to vary. One of the first things I did when I joined Aimclear was I sat down with every team member and I asked them, hey, how do you like to communicate? Are you an email person? Are you a project management system person? Do you like phone calls? And part of the reason I did that was because I knew that there was differences, right? And it was really funny because one of our developers said, just send me an email, don't call me. And then another one of our tech team members said, oh my gosh, don't send me an email. That'll totally overwhelm me. Just call me. And if I wouldn't have asked that to understand how they like to communicate, can you imagine how many extra hurdles we could have ran into that could have slowed us down in production work or providing good service to a client? When it's knowing that, so getting to know your people and really understanding what matters to them is just such a huge piece of it. And that doesn't matter if you're brand side or agency side, like that's just a general business principle. Like the companies, I think, that are really blockbustering themselves out, I think, in a way, or they're kind of on their way to probably failing, is the ones that are trying to do things how they always did it, that said, this is
right.
This is the thing. And they're not really listening to what are the maybe it's flexibility that the team needs. Maybe it's, hey, I really want emails, or I really need my lunch hour, or whatever those like little things are. But that's how you get people to move, is when you can properly communicate with them, give them what they need to be successful. And that's going to look different for every team, which is also, it's like the easiest and hardest thing to do in the world. Like,
yeah. Well, and there are pieces, whether you're let's call them a project manager within a brand side marketing department, or you're an agency side, there are people who are really familiar with these parts of communication. Think of an account manager. They know this stuff. They know, my client works between this hour and this hour, or they prefer being communicated to this way. So if we just tap into the things that we've already, or some of us have already done, and treat our own teams that same way, I've got to think that that's going to get us farther along.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of it too is when you have I was thinking about that that Twitter fire I was sharing with you one of the last times we spoke. So our team was dealing with some Twitter fires, which for most marketing teams is not completely unheard of. And of course,
Yeah.
support is questionable at best. And everything is everywhere. We're dealing with the dynamic team on the client side that's got a bunch of different silos and everything lives everywhere. And the only way that we were able to resolve the Twitter fire, get ads up and running, and really be successful in a campaign was through effective communication. It was getting on the phone. It was going into their Slack channel. It was sending emails to support, forwarding that back to everyone else. Like, it wasn't like,
Right.
we know how to run Twitter. It was, no, we know how to work together really well as a team to get through a Twitter fire, to get our Twitter campaigns running. So
Yeah. And again, so, I'll call that an ecosystem right there. You've got the support guys from the ad platform, you've got the client side, and you've got the agency. But importantly, you've got both agency kind of front end and back end. And I think one of the things that if we had tried to do this with the rigid kind of command and control structure that most of us used in the 2010s, in this instance where you're describing Twitter ads being declined, they'd still be down, right? And you wouldn't have anything in market. It took that really, to make this ecosystem idea real, we have to imagine that each of us is literally crawling into the other organization's workflow, and that we're not being too fussy about where my work ends and your work begins. We just have to get it all done. That, I think, that's what I hear you saying when you say we're really getting innovative in how we solve these things. That's just what today's world is calling for.
yeah, and I think that's why too, even if I look across clients, like how those integration systems or communication ecosystems, if you will, are set up vary. Like, are there some standard best practices when we are onboarding a client, or how clients like to work? For sure, but
Yeah.
it's custom every time, because it's like they're using something for their communication. They have a certain approval process. They need to be able to send things in a certain way. And sometimes you get lucky where they're like, hey, you guys just go for it, run, and you're like, awesome. But you have to kind of evolve based on what the needs are anyways as a team. So it's almost like reassembling what your team ecosystem is every single time you're
Yeah.
with a new client.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not looking at, if I use a hokey football analogy, it's like you're not trying to play the whole game, but you're just trying to set up the next play. And if the next play is just like, a sequence of a few steps that get things done, and you have the conversation with the client and they're like, yeah, no, you've got that. Okay, good. We've got the ball. We're just here to get a first down, right? That's just focus right on what we need right now. And then we'll huddle again with the client and we'll get to the next part.
Yeah. And it really is like that more of that iterative process with the client too. Like, long gone, in my opinion, are the days where it's like that waterfall effect of like, okay, we put all this
Yes.
stuff together, big fancy presentation.
Here's our kickoff.
Here's our like, everything's approved and this is what we're running forever. Like, it's so iterative of a collaborative process now, like with their teams, and we have to move so fast. Like, we don't have time. We don't have time to like spend all this time on like fancy decks all the time. It's like, no, we need to, like, there's something happening right now that we need to go after. It's like, let's get in a room. Here's the 4 concept ideas. Yes, that one looks great. Okay, do we need anything else? And then run, because you don't have time. Like, the days of like the Mad Men big picture, this is what we're running forever. Like, that stuff is done. Like, and I'm not saying that people can't do that with like TV or radio, but in
digital,
in digital, there's no way. I mean, the amount of iterative process we've had to go through just to get like ads approved because policy changes. Like, we don't have time to go through like that would we would totally miss the ball, which would then mean that we didn't get the results that we were looking for because we took too long in the process. So it definitely is, when we talk about the future, part of it is like, the days of the big reveal and this is it, like that's no.
Sure. Now, but if I think of, let's say, other, people in management that are listening to you, I can picture some of them breaking out in hives when you say things like you have people on your team and you're letting outsiders look at, let's say, their internal Slack discussions or vice versa. We've brought team members on, maybe they're even green team members. How, as a manager, while you're still, trying to get them up to speed, explaining to them some of the things that your company must be careful of, right? There are liability issues. There are confidentiality breaches that can happen. There might be agency internal IP that you are guarding. What do you say to people like that who are just saying, all right, I can't, handle having people sharing stuff on the fly because we have no way of helping, customize that. Like that. How do I tell them ahead of time? Oh, please don't include this in your discussion.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So with the way that, and I know I'm talking about agency side, I know internal is different, but we have very strict data and access protocols at the agency. So it really comes down to really putting that right team together, number one. So it's like, you don't want to have everyone on everything all the time. Like that's even like too many cooks in the kitchen anyways.
Yeah.
But part of it is making sure that you've got, if they're being plugged into a certain communication channel, the people that are supposed to be there, the things that are being spoke about, right, are the right things. If you're going to share certain data, there is different ways that needs to be done, especially when you talk about customer data. That gets definitely even like a little bit more when you talk about like compliance and all of that. And when I think of like when copy has to go through legal for certain companies, that's where we have like a pre-approved base, right? So that's when you create kind of like a framework ecosystem, spreadsheet, whatever you want to call it, all the pre-approved copy you can use, so that when you're going into ad creation mode or into activation mode, you don't have to go back to legal because all of your images, all of those things you're using to the best of your ability are pre-approved. So there's a little bit of a way to kind of work around that where you can. Now, the same time doesn't mean that some change isn't going to happen and now we got to go back through legal. Like that does happen sometimes. But anytime that we're getting ready to run campaigns anyways, we typically have like, read all of this. Even if we don't use it all right now, we want to get approval, because even for split testing, right? So whether you're in different video versions and all of that. So the more that you have pre-approved out the gate, as you start running into, testing or making changes, it becomes a lot easier because it's like, hey, even if we are making a change, this is the only thing that's changed. And then when you resubmit that through, it's a lot easier of a process.
I couldn't agree more. And in places like social, what we've seen is if a client comes up dry on, let's say, some creative, maybe an image or video, if you've done that documentation in the past, maybe you've even got an easy way of keeping it all in the same folder, like your workflow actually, makes things that they've done before. And sets them apart. I just had this the other day where we went to a client and said, because they said, we don't have anything to show here. I guess we're not going to do anything. We huddled. We came back to them and said, actually, a year and a half ago, you had this and it ran and it's not being, that asset isn't currently being used and it would fit perfectly here. So can we go with it? And they were like, yeah. Thank you. Save the day.
It's funny you bring that up because I think one of the biggest mistakes that I'll say agencies, I think, make arrogantly coming in on like a new client sometimes is like, oh, we need to reinvent the wheel on all the creative.
Yeah.
Well, that's not necessarily always the case. Like sometimes there is a ton of assets and creative elements that already exist that can be used. So, and sometimes that exists within sales teams, like things like sell sheets and brochures. Sometimes it's already video that they have that they created a while back, or like there's usually libraries of things that like, they're like, oh, I didn't even think about using that or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
So
And we shouldn't look down our nose at it.
yeah, absolutely. And let's test it, right? Let's test it
Yeah.
out, see what resonates. And then as we start ideating for new creative, and obviously there's a good purpose for new creative as well. So I don't want to like completely,
No.
look down on that. But sometimes it gets missed, especially in performance marketing. It's like the audience is really going to tell us anyways what's resonating. And we can sit here and debate all day long, should it be red or purple, but
Right.
the end of the day, like until you start doing CRO testing and all of that, like you're not going to know until you do it. So
Very true. When we're taking those people, though, that we're, putting, even if they're fresh, onto these accounts and having them work on stuff, or we're brand side and we're trying to give people some real battle experience, we have to be prepared to skill them up. And I think this is more important. I mean, you can always say it's been important, but, it seems to be of more importance, I guess, from a defensive and an offensive standpoint. From the defensive standpoint, we've seen a fair number of people who move, and this continues. I just saw that job vacancies are at an all-time high, at least in North America, and there's not a whole lot of people that you can just go to if somebody that you've been keeping in your team, but you haven't skilled them. It's not easy to go and get somebody else who can do that job.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that goes back to that's really kind of in the marketing and tech space right now, like just the overall like supply and demand of the market, and back to why like people wise, like really got to be paying attention right now to take care of your people. But if it's somebody new to the team that is learning and being brought up, like, half of it's going to be, whether it's, shadowing, whether it's sending to different training opportunities, letting them build and try things. I think about, again, the dark days of the beginning of my career of like I got really good at WordPress because I broke a lot of WordPress sites. Like that's literally what happened. So it's like you're trying to update something for a client and then something breaks and you're like, oh
Whoops.
no. And then you have to kind of figure it out. So there is a piece of it too that like you have to give the team also enough room to test and try and break things sometimes, like in a safe sandbox environment, right? Where it's like
Yeah.
nothing that's gonna totally cripple a company by any means. But when you talk about testing, like, yeah, let them test new ideas. Let them test, like even in the really beginning for me when I think of like the SEO space, which was still like so new when I got started, like nobody knew it. Like I would tell people I would like did SEO and everybody would like look at me. They're like, I don't know what that is. But some of that stuff was like coming up with ideas and just trying things and seeing if
Yes.
it would work. And if I wouldn't have been in an environment that allowed me at that time to just try things, I wouldn't have learned. So there is like this element, and that goes into like testing, whether it's beta testing in channel or letting your team test and try new things. Like same thing for newer people that are in the company, and then also giving them the support, right? Making sure they've got good leadership support to back them up, to give feedback, like all of that
Yes.
also matters. A lot.
Yes. Well, so, and I guess we're, dishing out some secrets here that agencies, or at least good agencies, have. But I think it's important for clients to know this. And if they think about it, they'll see the sense in it. But if you're being told that you need to devote 10 to 20% of your paid media budget for experimentation, that's absolutely true. There's a legit reason to, be looking at what's going to give you better conversion rates. But somewhere in the background, there is a newer marketing resource who also needs the opportunity. And from the agency standpoint, they're looking at their portfolio of clients and they're saying, this person doesn't know this skill. Oh, we have a client over here. They actually look like they're ready for an experiment. But just as importantly, I've got the person over here who can run that experiment.
Yeah. And it's when you think about the budget, like, from a media side of things, making sure you got budget to test and try new things, because you never know when what you're doing right now isn't going to work. Like, so that's a thing. But even with your team, like, you have to allot a certain amount of time and budget for their learning, for their education. And whether that's on a new project, whether that's, going to a conference, whether that's, testing a new thing with a new client that they haven't done yet, but we're like,
Yeah.
really feel strongly about this. And we have the data to back it up. It's not like, when we come up with these new things, there's usually like things that are showing signs that say this is why we need to do this, right? Like, if like I have clients right now that are testing some of the latest stuff out of Google beta, that
Yes.
there are others who are like, I'm not touching that thing with a 10-foot pole until like, like we absolutely have to. But I have clients who are like, I need to get in now, because what I don't want to do is wait too late and then be behind the ball. And then I would rather sandbox test and be able to adjust and scale than wait and then like fail. So it's like,
Yes.
you don't want to wait until it's too late to try something new. It's
Yeah.
too late. Like, you've already missed the ball. So you have to give that, that caveat, I think, of time and budget and resource.
Yeah. Again, another mind shift that you just have to say, all right, this experimentation budget, if I spread it across the cost of acquisition for those, campaigns that are actually making, I'm making closed sales from, if I just make it so that my numbers still work and I have 10% or so that I can use on these experiments, that's what I have to do if I'm going to be able to find something that's going to be my workhorse when that thing that I have right now that's rock solid starts diminishing.
Yeah. Or if you see something that's happening in the marketplace, whether that's
Yeah.
an ad channel,
Yep.
hey, there's an unknown, like, this thing's just happened. There's this unknown, like, now, like,
Yeah.
PP.
Or a partner, right? Somebody who could co-reg with you, do
Yeah.
something, that's never been done before. It really gets people's attention and interest.
Yeah. And some of the biggest successes I've seen are when it's just like, it is that one-off thing that's like, hey, I think this is going to work. I think we should try this. And then all of a sudden it blows up. And I've been talking, like, and I've done so much since then, but I really do, like, when we talk about innovating and like the mindset, and when I think of the early days of digital that I was in, like, I worked for a little hotel that was like in the middle of West Michigan. And it was,
Okay.
and I had this idea where, like, well, people aren't just looking for a hotel in that area. They're going and they're doing different activities. They're doing events. And so I mapped out like an event, like basically a things to do, like basically resource hub.
Okay.
And built out this entire content tree of blogs that was all about, like, hey, if you're going to go see this garden, or you're going to go to this arena, or this, concert that's coming up. And then, oh, by the way, we have a special hotel deal, right? It was everything they needed, but it turned into this resource hub, and it blew up. And this was a client who was only paying for SEO at the time. They were doing no paid at all. It was just SEO content.
Yep.
And like that idea, like when I looked at the numbers, I mean, you're talking like thousands of % increase in traffic. Like, their bookings were through the roof, like fully booked out over weekends when there was big events happening and all this stuff. And all that was like, hey, thinking about the user, right? Thinking about the people. Hey, if I'm going to this arena or I'm going to this thing,
Sure.
like, I'm going to need somewhere to stay. Well, what if we became the resource hub for those events? What if we became, and then, oh, by the way, even though it wasn't like a direct sale, it worked. It totally worked. And it was a shot in the dark in a lot of ways too. It was like just one of those things of like really understanding the audience, and also I think timing also, at the time, because it was so long ago now, but it was,
but that's, and it's funny, all things old are new again. It was, I remember those crazy days. And we seem to have gotten into this, maybe let's call it when Facebook, went beyond universities, and, all of a sudden the broad public got on. So social ads were a thing. And, at that point, let's say Google was out with their expanded text ads. So, like 2011, 2012. And from that point on, and they had things like AdWords Express. These were times when things seemed to get into a zone of stability. And I think, so my own theory on that, if we kind of play the generation game, is that even though the yous and me's of the world who were just starting out in those early 2000s, and we were trying crazy things, and some of them took off, then we get into management. And now there's like a cohort of management that had a period where they were told, if you can just keep the people that are coming in under you doing these things, turning these knobs, all will be well and you'll be rewarded.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're out of that. And frankly, the 2020s are looking way more like the early .com days.
Yeah.
And so, but we have the completely wrong management regime, right? Like, these people absolutely have to rewire their brains and tap into their past to be able to, because I bet you if most of them heard a, person who's 2 years out of school who comes to them today and says, hey, I've got this idea, and it's the equivalent of your hotel and resource hub idea, I hate to say it, most managers would turn them down.
And that goes
that's the opposite of what they should be doing.
And then that goes back to the mindset of the business, because in this case, the hotel was like, okay, sure, let's try it. Let's try something.
What do we got to lose?
Yeah, what do we got to lose? Like, great idea. We'll see how it goes. So it really was the mindset of them just saying, go with it, like run with it, report back. How's it doing? We did check-ins and all that stuff. And it crushed it. It did really, really well. And there's been other times too, right? Where like experiments have happened and they've failed. Like,
of course, but most do.
But even when I think of the, what I got at, I always tell in my beginning story, which I think is a lot for most of us who have been in the industry now, at least a decade or more, like I fell into digital. Like there was no classes on this stuff. Like there was nothing. So with that, like as I got into this space that I didn't even know existed, and it was still it's still being created, but like was really still being created at the time. Yeah. Like I had to go out and seek for what are other people doing? What are, what else exists? Is there there was no books written on it. So it's all, digital resource. So even today, when you're thinking about future proofing your marketing, you have to have the mindset to go out and seek for answers. You have to talk with other people too in the industry and say, hey, what are you trying? Anything work? Like that's the one thing that I do love. I'm so passionate about this industry because we do have more of a like collaborative environment because we're all figuring it out together, because there isn't a rule book that says this is exactly what's going to happen with Google in the next 6 to 12 months. It's like, crap, we don't know. They're rolling this thing out. It's jacking up all my stuff. Like, what do I like? Have you tried anything new lately? What's worked? Like, that's such a huge piece of it.
I'm with you, but I've got to add an asterisk, and that is that the ones that get the, frankly, the trade press and the people that are, whose voices are heard the loudest at conferences and things like that. These are the global holding company agencies and the biggest of the big brands that work with them. And because I find that everything that you've described works for those of us in, a medium and small kind of ecosystem, and that when we talk with each other, this is exactly what we find. Oh, was that working? Yeah, it was, but then it stopped. Okay, but what else is? And yet, if I were to listen to these guys, they act like they have it all figured out. They act like they know exactly what's going to happen 6 months from now. And, I frankly don't think they do, but I can't worry about that.
Yeah.
Right.
There's no way. I mean, I remember there was a time right after Facebook Pixel rolled out. Couldn't get that thing to work for the life of me. Like literally had full teams of people on this thing. Tried this like every which way. Support is, what support is.
Yeah.
Spoke with someone in the industry who's a very good friend of mine and said, how the heck did you get this thing to work? And this person told me, do it backwards, do the instructions basically backwards, and then
Wow.
And I was like, are you serious? She's dead serious.
That's the craziest thing.
And did it. And sure enough, it worked. And I'm like, if I wouldn't have asked,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
I
See?
asked, like,
Right.
and the reality of it is, like, the installation was not what Facebook said it was. It was not what any forum, like it, like,
But we all as kids learned that story of the emperor's new clothes. And this is exactly that, right? But if you read the outside thing, if you read the support articles only or the press releases, it's like, no, it works. It's flawless. It's great. And here it took you to, kind of say to somebody, this doesn't work. They're like, yeah, the emperor's naked.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of things like that within the digital ecosystem. So I'm
Yes.
like the big brand side, sometimes like those that are really, they're so disconnected when you talk about sometimes there's a larger disconnect, I think, between like what's happening in the actual work itself versus some of those that may be talking about what's happening at the work level.
Yeah.
And I don't know, in my experience in this industry, it's like, you still have to be willing to roll your sleeves up. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Or the thing that I would put it, and maybe I'm just more of a like survival mentality, is those big brands can afford to waste, and a smaller brand, the difference between a campaign doing terribly or being implemented badly and a campaign that does well will be the difference between them, being able to hold on to their whole head count or grow it versus not. So we're not playing at the same game here. We actually are, this has import into people's lives. Just maybe to hedge off of that for a second, when we talk about the people that are inside of our teams, what are we having to do, or what do you think it takes for us to help them out now? Like comp is a big issue. And I think it's a big issue because, I don't know if it's going to be long-term, but I do know that many companies had done all right with saving on, some costs, particularly in the marketing costs. And they came through into 2022, 2021 and 2022. And when they were giving offers to people, I think some of them were getting pretty punch drunk with the numbers that they were, using to lure people. And, I have to ask, what's our posture supposed to be for that? Do we simply, when an employee says, I want more, or do we look at other things in the package that we can offer them and say, well, let's take you as a person, and let's not just worry about one thing. Let's worry about all the things that you are trying to get out of your marketing career. How can we help you in all of them?
Absolutely. I think, compensation, I think, is a huge discussion point in this industry right now. And the other thing that makes it challenging is that it's not like all the titles are like, it's wild, right? Like what somebody calls it in one place versus like so the titles are another thing too. So trying to look at like competitive mapping is really difficult. One of the things that I have done in my like leadership journey is I actually validated pay scales with other industry leaders. Similar style agency shops, similar style, like if it's an account manager, a strategist, a list, whatever. And I said, hey, would you be willing to talk to me about comp structures? And I said, I'll show you mine and show yours,
right. Yep.
And everyone I asked said yes, because everyone's been having the same thing, because they want to make sure, like, am I paying people competitively? Does this like make sense? Right. Like, is this like, even from a level of like how many years they've gotten in the business versus what they're responsible for? Like, how many different channels are they touching? Are they also doing, other hats? Like, what does that mean when that happens? So, that's definitely a piece of it. But I think even bigger than that too is supply, like, because of supply and demand, the costs are going up in this industry. And and there's less people coming into it still, like that training. We have a training gap right now too. And then the demand is just skyrocketed. So there's like money for somebody to leave and go make more money is like the easiest thing for anyone in marketing and tech pretty much to do at this point.
Yeah.
And so we, as businesses, agency and brand side, we have to be paying attention to that too, because we have existing team members that we need to make sure that are we scaling them fast enough to what the industry is adjusting to some degree, because we need to make sure they're being paid competitively. But then also that money doesn't come from nowhere. There's no secret money tree. Clients have to pay for that. Brands have to pay for that, which means pricing models have to shift. So part of it is, understanding that and like making a plan the best you can to like accommodate that. And also having really transparent dialogue with your team. Like if the one thing the team member is asking for is money and everything else is great, like they're a great team member and they, they're growing in what they're doing and they're really happy. Like that is a business. That's an easy solve. Like that's a super easy.
Go to your superior and find the money. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's an easy solve, because what isn't calculated is like, if that person leaves, like downtime of that. Right. So like when you think of, if someone really great leaves just because we weren't able to keep up with their comp, you've got the downtime of, let's say you have the time, like, let's say they give you 2-week notice. If you're lucky, they give you 30, but 2 weeks probably at best notice. You've got 90 days typically between the time that they put their notice in and you actually hire someone is about a 90-day window. 60 to 90
counting ramp up.
Yeah.
Right. Then, so like 150 or 180 days to actually put somebody there.
And then once they get in, you got 90 days of training and onboarding.
See? Yeah.
And then really before they become a full-fledged team member where they're, fully at like, doing their thing. I mean, that's probably another 90. Like so now you just lost 9 months. You've just lost 6 to 9 months of productivity, like in your business.
Yeah.
Over what could have been easily solved.
Right. And what we sometimes even do is we'll compound our problems, because let's say that we're in a real fix to replace them, and we do inflate the cash part of the offer. We're possibly sowing the seeds for the next people on the team, because, I call that playing the airline seat game. If we think they don't know what each other make, we're kidding ourselves. Right. And, I kudos to you for having the attempt to bring roles and a scale in, that's important. But even so, people are going to size up each other's skills, and, they're going to try and run their own equity, in their heads. Question for you: when they do come to you, and now it's about them being willing to skill up, and they would like the company to help sponsor them to, I don't know, do a part-time certification or maybe even a bigger university program. How do you think companies in the 2020s should be tackling that?
I think that should all be part of your package benefits, and maybe there's a two-way street there, right? Like it's like
such as.
Yeah, like if you're gonna, hey, we'll help facilitate you going for training. We'll help pay for that and sponsor that time.
Yep.
But in return, we want, a certain tenure of time, or you'd have to pay us back. Or there's, I think there's some different ways and creative ways to look at it. But I do think, so taking money off the table for a second, like one of the things that happened also like over the last, few years, I think it was kind of a rolling, COVID accelerated it, but it was happening regardless.
Sure.
It was happening, where people are also reevaluating their overall like lifestyle. So it isn't just about money anymore. It's, do I have flexibility, to pick up my kids, or I want to be able to work from anywhere, or what's really important to me is my student loan, is getting repaid, or my health insurance coverage. Like different things are going to matter to different people depending on the season of life that they're in and what matters to them. So part of it is like, you have to have a program that's also going to really meet those needs. And if you're trying to fit everyone into this like 1980s box of like, here's your 401k and here's this, and you get 10 PTO days. And like, it's just all like it's going to be very difficult to succeed in this market, because at the end of the day, like the right talent, like there's a, like we need to accommodate for the right talent, and the companies that are going to win right now are the ones that have the best talented people. And how do you retain really great talent? Well, you listen to what matters to them and what they need. And sometimes money is a piece of it.
Sure.
But the amount of people that I've seen walk away from money and say, you know what, I'll leave that behind because I care more about these other things.
Yeah.
I mean, has been outstanding. I mean, it's amazing. And then on top of it, there's a lot of people too, when we talk about the job market shift, that walked away from working, whether brand side or agency side, and said, hey, I'm going to go and do something else, solopreneur style. And like that's the thing, because like, so, so when we look at our teams and we say, okay, are they succeeding? Are they happy? Are these the right people? Like, how do we help grow and nurture them? Like, we have to look at that big picture. Like, if your whole thing is, my bucket list is I want to go and backpack in Europe for, for a month, and I want to be able to do like whatever that is.
Yeah.
As a leader, I should be thinking, how do I help you get there?
Yeah. Would you prefer you take the same amount of hours you would do in 12, but do them in 11? Like, whatever it is, you get flexible. The thing that comes back on this is we seem to, I guess this is a human thing. We always kind of reduce it to ourselves. But if we are in management or we're in leadership, the thinking we've done, in 2022 is, wow, we just made it through, 2 years that was really stressful, and we got innovative, and that was all great. We can't stop there. We have to remember that every single team member, every single freelancer, anybody in our ecosystem, they also went through it. And they also did a lot of hard thinking. And so when they are asking for something that is out of the ordinary, we have to keep with that spirit of agile innovation and be willing to talk with them about it. We got to maybe sort things out so that we can have some streamlining. But, we can't just, as you say, go back to the 1980s. I'm picturing those two-sided, booklets that they would always, bring to you with all the sheets of paper in them. Here you go. We have to be willing to throw that out and say, all right, what's going to work for you? Is that, does that Venn diagram circle overlap with our Venn diagram circle that says we can do it?
And sometimes it doesn't. And that's okay too. I think that's a big thing that maybe we don't talk enough about, is that it's okay when like a company or a position isn't the right fit for many reasons. Like, so it's just as important when I coach and mentor others in the industry that are, grow, like even outside of my own existing team. Like a lot of what we talk about is you need to have your cup fillers and your cup drainer list. You need to have the what matters to you list. And that what matters list needs to be bigger than just, I want to, make X amount of dollars. Like, yeah, if you have a money goal, like write the money goal down, but also like, what do you care about? Like when I wrote my list, like the example I give my teams is like, I care about diversity and inclusion. That's super important to me.
Right.
Innovating in this industry is super important to me. Being able to try new things, make an impact, support growth, super important to me as a person and what I want to do. Like make an impact on the industry, like that matters to me. Now that might not matter to everyone, but that matters to me. Like, so when I'm looking at what do I want to do, and is this aligned with where I want to go? Like those are the things I'm looking at too, not just money and everything else, right? Like, because if you put me inside of a large corporate agency, I would mentally like, that's
not a pretty picture.
No, like, and on the flip side, there's people who look at me and be like, she's crazy. I would never do that. Right. So, and that's okay. And I think part of it is like understanding that's okay. And even for companies thinking about what kind of business they are and what they want to do, they have to kind of go through that too. Like what really matters to them in a team, like what are those values? And like, so when somebody is coming through to evaluate, is this really what I want to do? There's a better chance of alignment. Right. And then you're finding those better fits, because when you're in this shift that's happening right now, if you're just hiring to hire and then it's not even really the right fit for either party, like it's a waste for both people. It's not just like the person suffers, but so does the business. It's like there's no win-win,
Yeah.
there.
What do they say? The mistake we do in most interviewing is that we bias towards people who look like us or who think like us or who are, mini versions of ourselves. And that's absolutely what we should not do. Because if we're expecting that new problems are going to come up, then how the heck are we going to think our way out of those new problems if we have the same old people and the same people who are all group thinking around, the way I think? That's just a recipe for disaster. So the diversity thing, just from even an efficiency standpoint, it just makes so much sense that, you want to lean into those things. You have to know what you want and expect that everybody else is coming to the table ready to talk about what they want to.
Mm-hmm.
Amanda, if people want to find out more about you or, what you do at Aimclear or any of that stuff, where can they go?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can always go to aimclear.com. Amanda at aimclear.com is my email address. Afreed is my Twitter handle because that's my maiden name. And it was like the one thing I did not give up when I got married was my Twitter handle. So
sure.
But yeah, we're happy to chat more. And thanks so much for having me too.
Oh, my pleasure. And I think that people listening to this got a ton out of how they can future-proof and, at least mentally grapple with, the kind of change that is just going to be ever present in what we do. I hope they share it with people who maybe are also, just sounding frustrated or stuck and want to get a fresh perspective on how they can manage with this. And I bet if they do some of the things that you suggested, it'll help them make their funnel even better. Thanks.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter @Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.